Now that we have a better understanding of HTTP modules and handlers, let's revisit the part of the request lifecycle related to routing and handler selection. So the URL routing module is a module like any other, and it provides a method to handle the post-resolve request cache event. Inside this method, the module compares the incoming URL to a route table, like we discussed earlier. And if it matches the URL to a route defined by our MVC application, it will execute the associated MVCRouteHandler. Now remember, a route handler is not the same as an HTTP handler. A route handler is just a class that implements the iRouteHandler interface, and that interface only exposes one member, which is the getHTTPHandler method. This method will return an instance of the MVC handler. This MVC handler is no different from any other HTTP handler. It simply implements the two methods on the iHTTPHandler interface. We can confirm all of this by investigating the MVC source code again. So back in my browser, I have a couple of tabs open. Let's first look at MVCRouteHandler, which is a pretty simple class with a very important purpose. We can see that it implements the iRouteHandler interface, and the getHTTPHandler method for that interface is actually implemented down at the bottom of the class here. In this case, getHTTPHandler actually calls another method which handles some session state behavior for us. We aren't interested in that right now. All we care about at the moment is this line right here that says return new MVC handler and passes in the request context. This is the code that provides the URL routing module with an instance of MVC handler. I also have that MVC handler class itself open in another tab. MVC handler is a bit more complex, but we're only interested in part of this code at the moment. If we scroll down a bit again, we can see where this class implements the two members of iHTTPHandler, process request and is reusable. Process request is abstracted out into another member, and we can see the implementation details of it a bit further up. Inside this method, we're retrieving instances of an MVC controller and a related controller factory to work with. Once we have those instances, we can call the execute method of our controller. This block of code is very important. This is really the entrance into the MVC framework. As we discussed earlier, all of the MVC framework's execution is really triggered by this process request method of the MVC handler. Later on, we'll look more closely at how that controller instance is actually created and what happens when it executes. So now we've explored the MVC handler selection and the modules that support this process. Next, we want to turn our attention to the details of the MVC handler's execution, which we just glimpsed at in the source code. As we step through the execution, we'll explore the components most MVC developers work with day to day and understand how a request travels through those features.